Hi, I'm Brad Brown. This is my mother, Jean Brown, and she's going to continue with the history of Taneytown, the early years of Taneytown, the business districts. Previously went over the business districts on East Baltimore Street, and today we're going to cover West Baltimore, Frederick Street, and York Street. Jean, Mom, if you want to start, I guess, with your memories of West Baltimore Street.
Okay, this is chapter 2. So on West Baltimore Street, the first thing was a small little jewelry store. And I really don't know the owner because I never went into that store. We always patronized the Lancaster one. And next to that was the Model Steam Bakery. And that was run by Webb Smith of Woodsboro and his 2 sons, Cash and Robert. They had much the same merchandise and products of Bumgarner's, but on a smaller scale. And they finally closed, went to Frederick County in a little village named Ladysburg. And let me see, the next thing down was Newcomer's service station. And I wasn't knowledgeable of Mr. Newcomer's station, but I did find in my father's belongings canceled checks that were made out to newcomers, so I know it was a place like that. And the next service station was Gene Eiler. And at his retirement, Booty Fair took it over, and he was there well into the 60s, maybe even beyond that. So that took care of the south side of the street. And then we're down at the famous Savills Inn. And she had a wonderful business going, and a lot of customers from the city, Baltimore, Washington mostly. Sundays, people were lined up and sitting on the rocking chairs waiting for their turn. And I was fortunate enough to be hired there briefly because I knew the granddaughter well, and she got me a job there, and I worked long enough to buy some shoe skates. And Mrs. Saville closed in the early 40s during the wartime because of gasoline rationing. The city people couldn't come, and also because of food rationing. We were rationed with sugar, coffee, flour, and many other products, and I guess she couldn't make the dinners.
Okay. And then that pretty much takes care of West Baltimore Street. Let's go to the corner of Frederick Street on the square.
Frederick Street didn't have too many businesses. The first was John Miller's Hat Shop. And we were only in this town a few months when my mom said one Saturday, let's walk up. It was getting towards Easter and she wanted a hat. So we went in and Mr. Miller said, oh, I don't think I've ever seen you folks in my store. And Mother said, no, we've never been here. We're rather new in town. And when she said that, he said, are you the new folks out on East Baltimore Street? And she said, yes. Well, where did you move from? And Mom said, Woodsboro, but I grew up in Rocky Ridge. So then he said, oh, I know that area. Who were your folks there? And she said, Jim and Emma Angel. He said, I know those people. I had one of the best meals in my life at that house. So that made me feel real good, because here's a man that owns a store, well dressed, and he knows my grandparents, because I was still feeling like a stranger in this town. I didn't know that many people. And the next was John and Flora Leicester's bowling alley and lunchroom, another very popular place, and she was a marvelous cook, and she always had a good many customers for her baked goods and her cooking. And I guess that's about all on.
Did that later become Moffitt's?
Yeah, later when the Leicesters were, well, I thought they were elderly when I was a teenager, but I guess they really weren't. But they retired and the Moffitts took it over.
I see. Then after that, it came in the antique
Well,
store.
after that it became Fogel's Antique Shop, but that was much later.
And then back in the day when the Leicesters had it, they had a bowling alley there still? Or
When
back
Moffitts had it,
when the Leicesters launched it?
when Leicester's had the bowling alley.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it was still in operation when the Moffitts took that over, and it surely wasn't, because that's one reason Mr. Fogel took that over, because there was a lot of room for his antiques.
Mm. How many lanes did they have about?
I think it was only 3 lanes.
About 3 lanes?
And if you didn't want to see the movie, something was not to your liking, you could spend your quarter over and bowl.
Sounds like a good night out. All right, we'll go to the York Street on the square. What was
York
there?
Street, right on the corner of York and West Baltimore, was the town theater. And another place that was well attended almost every time you went in there. Of course, during war years, again, you didn't have gasoline to run to Hanover, Westminster movies. You stayed in town. And up above that, Mr. Schreiner had a sewing factory.
Okay. Then, was there a grocery store close by there?
The next thing in the 30s and early 40s, an MP store was there. And I had experiences with that store and went in there because several times when my mom still worked at Cambridge Rubber and didn't have the car, she'd say, "Don't go home after school. Meet me up at the store to help me carry groceries home." Well, she made $7.50 a week, and we had enough groceries, big, tall, 12, 14 inches tall paper bags that we were carried at our waist up to our chin and had a mile to walk home with those groceries. And I know you can't think that you needed help to carry maybe $6 worth of groceries. On today's standard, that might be a box of cereal and a loaf of bread, and you have it. You don't even need help to carry $40 worth of groceries today.
Mm. Yes,
And of course, that wasn't your dairy products, because all through the 30s, 40s, well into the 50s, Willow Farms Dairy brought your milk to the front porch and put it in an insulated box.
very convenient.
Do you remember that?
I do remember vaguely in the 60s. When I
Maybe it was still here in the 60s.
It was still sitting on the front porch.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
good.
it was in the 60s. And then, was there a hardware store close by then?
Yes, it was Roy Garner's store then, and it was much the same as Rheindollars as far as products, but he did have a big portion of the store for painting products of all kinds, of drop cloths, gowns of paint, brushes of all types. Then he wasn't there that long. I don't remember, in the 40s, to the Zerfings hardware took it over. And they didn't last too long in town either. And then it was Hopkins Pharmacy for many years.
Very
All
nice.
during the 50s it was Hopkins Pharmacy.
Mm. Did they have like a little lunchette there, a luncheonette place to eat as well, or no?
I don't remember that they ever had.
Okay.
They might have had fountain cokes, but I don't remember any type of food that they sold.
Okay. And then at the edge of town, was there
Edge
anything
of town on the same side was Kiefer's service station. And right sort of opposite was the big Cambridge Rubber Company, which brought us to this town. And as I said, my mom made $7.50 a week and my dad $12.50. And somehow, with $20 a week, we made it across the street with the water bills, electric bills, and whatever else.
Okay.
And I don't remember ever being hungry, but you can't think of that.
No, it's
I mean, $12.50, even my dad's wage a week, you make more than that, most people an hour.
it's a bygone time, that's for sure. And then when you weren't working in the winter time and there was some snow on the ground, I guess that was a good place to go.
Well, that was our sledding hill. Well, some of us, other people were on the other end of town on Frederick Street. But for me, and as I said to Sandy yesterday, so many of my schoolmates lived on that street. It was the Hilberts, the Sarwines, the Klutzes, the Aschenfelders, the Lintons, all were in high school when I was. And if you got up beyond Fairview Avenue and got a good running start, you could go all the way to the entry to the cannon factory. And sometime we were double-decked, 3 or even 3 people.
Wow.
And it was a lot of fun. And another thing, the traffic in an hour's sliding time, I bet you didn't see more than 4 or 5 cars, and someone would always shout, "Car coming," which meant get out of the way.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, that pretty much sums up the remaining streets in town. I'd like to touch base on one of the local, maybe homeless individuals that was here back in the day. What was the
Crazy Raymond. That's what everybody called him, but his name was, what's that, Raymond Dumas, or?
It was
Yes.
Raymond Dumas.
And he came here homeless, and somehow he liked my mom's fried eggs, sandwiches. And so many mornings would be a little tap at the door. "Mrs. McCleaf, make me an egg sandwich, she's hungry." And if it was good weather, he sat on a swing on our back porch and had his sandwich, and a lot of times coffee. Then my dad would be ready to go to Westminster. "Take me along to Westminster," he'd say to my dad, and it usually took him. And of course, I wanted to say, Raymond wore 4 or 5 layers of clothing, winter and summer, and sometime the body odor got a little bit strong. But my dad, I guess, could stand it, and he'd take him to Westminster. Then it was time for me, in about an hour, to go to school. And many a time, who do I see on my way to school but Raymond? And I'd say to him, "Thought you went to Westminster." "Oh, I'm back already." And he'd give that chuckle he'd always give. And another wonderful thing that he could do, if you did him favors, he would cut you out with a piece of paper the size of that, many times over his head, cut, not even look at it, and it would be a beautiful design. Well, my mom wasn't a saver. They would be there 2 or 3 days and they would end up. But Elizabeth Bumgarner was very good to him. She even told me she allowed him to take baths at her hotel. And she saved, one time, Elizabeth and I had a project to do for the Heritage Committee, and she told me to come to her house, and she opened a desk drawer, and she had at least that many cuttings. And I don't know what ever happened to those, if they were destroyed or if the sun took them or what happened to them. But he was not only well known here, Union Bridge, New Windsor, Westminster. He traveled all around and got all around somehow.
And there was a tourist home neighbor, was it Miss Putman?
Oh, that was on this street. You
On the
mean
street?
Mrs.
Okay,
Percy Putman's tourist house.
Okay, that's off of, yeah.
That's only right across the street, and for many years she ran one of the first tourist homes in the area.
Okay.
And I was only a teenager, but many a times Mr. Putman would knock on our door and say, could I come over and help his wife, that someone would stop for a meal. And I told Sandy this story when I helped with the meal one time, and Mrs. Putman would take, you don't know, it was something that came in a package about like this, like a brick.
Right.
It was white and it looked like lard. And it had a package about this big of coloring. So you saved many dollars, and you took that thing and put the color over and then mixed it with your hands. And Mrs. Putman knew how to make it look like creamery butter, like homemade butter. And she'd make little daubs across the top. So one time when they asked me to help, and the guests were raving about their homemade butter, and I guess I was too naive to go along with what they thought, and I said, that isn't creamery butter, that's margarine. And when I got out into the kitchen, Mrs. Putman said, never do that again, don't tell them it's not creamery butter.
No, reveal the secrets there. Very well. Maybe you could touch base on what year did you move to Taneytown? What year was it when you moved to Taneytown?
When we moved here was January 1st, 1936.
Okay. And you were into music a little bit back then. You had some music lessons that you took, piano lessons?
Well, yes, I did, and as tight as dollars were, my mom paid 50 cents an hour to Father Shawn to give me piano lessons. But my mom said it's really two things. You're learning something, and it's my entertainment, because he was entertaining. Every song he would tell you about who wrote it, and a little bit about their life, and especially in the summer, over across the street, right at the living room window, my mom would put a lawn chair and listen to all his things that he would tell about.
Mm. Very nice.
And he used to have recitals up above the country kitchen. Every year he'd have a piano recital.
Very nice. And you were also playing another instrument.
That was another thing, yes. I wanted to be in the band, and when I said I wanted to be in the band and my parents said, what did I want to play, I said trombone. And my Dad, I guess, didn't want to say, we can't afford a trombone. He said, oh, that's no instrument for a girl. It makes your mouth misshaped. But it was really because they couldn't afford to buy an instrument. So I ended up with the cheapest thing you could buy, a snare drum. And I took lessons from Mr. Robert Minchie, and he'd come once a week from Hanover and give lessons up above at the Opera House.
And then you played in what band?
Oh, that band was the Taneytown Junior IOOF Band. And we had capes, gold and maroon, and a hat that looked like a officer in the army, and we went various places and strawberry festivals and picnics and played and made money, not much, but they paid the band, and every year we got invited to the Hanover Park, which has long since been going too, but that was a great day for our band.
Very nice. Then what year did you graduate from Taneytown High School?
43.
Yeah. And I guess lunches weren't that expensive back then, were they? Lunches expensive back then?
That was another thing. Lunches, even up into the 50s, were for me, a quarter was 2 lunches. Everything was a nickel.
Wow.
Even the ice cream was a nickel, the pie, cake, soup. But I could always get a quarter, and it was supposed to last me. One day I could have a dessert. The other day I just could get a sandwich and soup maybe.
Very good. And then your previous employment career, where did that start?
Well, as soon as I graduated, I went to Westminster, because by then my dad was employed in Westminster, and asked for a job at Rosenstock's Ladies Shop. And I was hired there and worked to 2 of the women that I liked a lot. Went down the street to T.W. Mathers, and they kept telling me, come on down this store. This is better working conditions and everything. And I finally went to T.W. Mathers.
Okay.
And I was there, let me see, 44, up to 45, I guess. And then the start of 45, that's when I went to the Maryland State School for the Deaf as a supervisor, or that's what they called that, and worked there to that school year. And when Dr. Beerley was his name, the person who hired you, and he was in charge of the deaf school. And as I got up to leave the day he hired me, he said, oh, by the way, it'd be a good thing if you tell the girls that you're a little bit older than you actually are. He said, fib a little bit and make it 2 or 3 years older. So I wasn't there too many days when one of the girls wrote, how old are you? And I wrote back and did what he told me. I stretched it about 3 years. And right away she wrote back and said, if you're that old, how come your school ring says 43? Oh. So
right.
I soon became aware that what they lacked ears, they were seeing, I mean, because that was small.
Very small print, yeah.
And I didn't even know that that they saw my hand and saw the school ring for 43.
It's very good.
But that was very interesting, and I went there mostly because I had a first cousin deaf at that school, and then her parents said they had an opening, and that's why I went in there.
Okay.
And when I had a free weekend, that's when I rode on the train. The Pennsylvania Railroad come home, and many times I went back on that too.
I see. Very well. And then after that was what was next?
Then I went back to T.W. Mathers,
Oh,
and he hired me again. And that's where I worked when I was married in 47. And then after inventory, always things got very slow during the winter months there for us customers. And I guess it was 48 or 49 that when I had those couple months off, I walked up to Taneytown High School and asked the principal, I always wanted to know how to type in shorthand, and could I come join the senior class and learn that? And certainly, George Shire said, yes, you can. So I spent most of every day, January, February, and I guess even to March, I finally caught up with the senior class as far as the typing lessons, because I would stay long after typing class for hours and just keep doing what Mrs. Myers told me as far as the procedure to learn to type. Then I didn't want to go back to the salesperson, so I went to Cambridge Rubber and asked for a job, and they hired me and put me in payroll. Well, that place, I endured it because it wasn't nowhere else. I didn't have a car, so I stayed there. And next thing, one day the phone rang over across the street and was Mr. Shower. And his opening question was, "Hello, what are you doing with all that knowledge that you learned?" And I said, "Well, I'm at the Cambridge Rubber Company. How would you like to be secretary at Taneytown High School?" And I said, "I would love it." And he said, "Well, come in August to get the school ready, textbooks sorted and all that thing." So I gave my farewell to Cambridge Rubber, and then was 50 to, well, halfway through 1960, working at Taneytown High School. Altogether, I put 18 years in that building.
Wow. What principals did you work under?
What principals? Okay, it was Mr. Shower, Mr. Manspeaker, Mr. Herring, Mr. Mason, and Mr. Musser.
Very good.
And when I got to Mr. Musser, after 10.5 years, things that we had been doing all those years, when he was a teacher too during those years, but suddenly the way he looked at it, it was not being done properly or to his liking, and he wanted to change it. And my thoughts were, I was happy with the way the other 4 principals were doing things, and I sort of bid him a sudden adieu.
Very well. Then after that, where'd you go then?
Well, I stayed home a little while, and then I thought I should get to work again, and I went down to a place called Lincoln Ladder Company, which was run by the Bear brothers. And I worked part-time there. I worked 3 days a week, but strangely enough, at 3 days a week, I was making the same salary as I did at the school for 5, so. But the brothers, in a couple of years I was there about 2 years. And those brothers were every day almost in a bitter argument. It was starting to get on my nerves so bad that in '62 I asked them to find a replacement, and they always said they would, but in the end I had to find my replacement through calling Francis Scott Key High School and asking. In '62 I came home.
Okay.
And then, of course, Keith's business was going really well, so I became the secretary of Brown's Cabinet Building.
Sounds like a pretty good business.
And then in '64, you made your appearance.
Yes, I did.
And I didn't want a job anymore. Everybody was telling me, "Oh, you always worked. You won't like it staying home," but I loved it.
Good. Well, thank you very much.
And that's sort of the end of chapter 2. And
very well. Thank you very much then for sharing with us all that history.